about the future of Central Europe inside the European Union from a regional and probably Polish perspective. The floor is yours, Adam. Thank you for coming.
Köszönöm. Okay, thank you very much for having me here, and it's really always a great pleasure to be here in Budapest. So I will start maybe with something very basic, why this region and what does it mean, this region, Central Europe. I will focus especially on Visegrad 4 and why this region matters. So first of all, Janis has already mentioned, I will provide you with some numbers, figures, because I still believe that they are important. And of course, Janis has already said that Germany is crucial regarding the EU. It's some kind of engine of growth. The size matters, of course, and there is enormous scale of cooperation in economic sphere. I mean, FDI, stocks, trade, these global value chains between the region and Germany. Just to provide you with really basic numbers, which sometimes even for people in the region are shocking, that before the war, before the sanctions, last year, in fact, last year, the total volume of trade between Visegrad 4 and Germany was 335 billion euros. So it's like, in order to compare with some countries, with China alone it was 245, with the US 195. Currently, for instance, Poland is, of course, because of its size, is the most important partner from the V4. But nevertheless, if you compare, for example, Poland with France, there is right now something like the Polish trade accounts for, with Germany accounts for something like 85% of trade between Germany and France. Czechia has the same trade volume with Germany like the UK, or for instance, Hungary before the war was as much important partner for Germany as Russia. So that's really matters. These numbers are sometimes shocking for people, but I think we should remember about them, and I wanted to remind you about them. So developments in this region are important for the EU. They can have also negative or positive implications, spillovers, and so on. And here, what is going on because of the war and the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And I will, of course, make some projections, prognoses. I'm going to speculate a little bit. So, in my humble opinion, thanks God, what we are seeing right now is, in fact, that Russia is losing this war. And definitely is not winning, and because of this military defeat, what we can expect is that, of course, we will have, in the case of continuation of survival of Putin's regime, we will have some kind of Cold War with Russia. With things like, of course, disinformation, psychological warfare, public opinion warfare, trolls, bots, fake news, spies, intelligence-based warfare, propaganda, foreign electoral interventions, and things like that. Because, of course, regarding the military threat, thanks to Ukraine's stubborn resistance and heroism, definitely that's our great window of opportunity that this threat from Russia in a conventional dimension of military sphere is decreasing. But nevertheless, Russia will do as much as possible to provoke divisions, polarization, conflicts, internal struggles, cleavages within the framework of the European Union. So this unity of the European Union is of crucial matter, and Russia is not going to be alone, because I would like to mention also China. What we are observing right now is definitely that it's a very asymmetrical relationship between Beijing and Moscow is deepening very fast. Again, what is going on and happening right now is in fact that in summer this year, China surpassed the EU, the entire EU, as the first trade partner of Russia. So it means that that's the history, and it also means that we are facing a country which is much stronger than Russia. Of course, if you compare the size of its economy, GDP nominal is right now 9 times bigger, and pretty soon in 5 years it's going to be 1 to 12 in favor of China. And this country, of course, will use the same tools against us, as I have already mentioned, concerning these soft threats to our security. And of course, it can use also economic pressure and corruption. They can quite often just corrupt us, by us, that's the problem. And definitely regarding this vision of that we have democratic states versus more authoritarian, and in the case of China also more nationalistic states, that's a huge challenge. Of course, thanks God, I think that this war against this Russian aggression against Ukraine also made China think twice before using conventional force against any state in its surroundings, in that case Taiwan. So that's a broader picture, globalized view, and right now a few words about the region. So what is the impact of the war on the region? So as István has already mentioned, here in Hungary, Fidesz managed to won elections, and right now still it enjoys, unfortunately, that's reality, in the opinion poll, something like some support of something like half of population, around 50% even. Of course, we are talking about a country which is, according to the terminology of the Freedom House, only partly free, and we have this democratic backslide, authoritarian slide, unfortunately. And again, what is also very terrifying, that we have guys like really radical right, Mihazan, our homeland, and guys, they won something like 7%, as you know, and right now they are also increasing slightly their support in the opinion polls up to 10%. And these guys are really ugly, even worse than Orban, let's put it that way, regarding their xenophobia and chauvinism. And very pro-Russian position, very, yeah, that's the problem. And of course, you are very familiar with Orban's foreign policy, and you know that he's playing his own game regarding Russia, and this relationship is sometimes for us in Poland, even for guys, István mentioned, and even for guys from the law and justice, shocking, but in his case, I mean, Orban doesn't care about some issues like morality and things like that regarding Ukraine. So that's the situation in Hungary, that the war contributed to a certain degree, to a quite large degree, to Orban's victory in national elections. We have Slovakia, and in Slovakia we can observe also warring trends, sometimes that you can observe also in other European countries, that left, not only far left, but even left, so-called traditional left, is radicalizing itself and becoming some parties, of course, only some parties, thanks God, and becoming strongly pro-Russian, and they are open to cooperation with far right. In that case, I'm talking about Robert Fico and Social Democrats, Smer, yeah? And these guys, right now, they enjoy support of something like 16-18% of electorate, sometimes even close to 20%, and Fico is very openly, he's very outspoken in his support of Russia, and at the same time he declared that he doesn't have any problem to establish after the next elections coalition with Republic. That's again a far-right party which increased its support recently, has increased recently. Right now, of course, just 8%, but still there is a quite huge room for maneuver for this party to increase at least to 10% or even more. So we have around 30%, yeah, of this kind of electorate, and it's also in the opinion polls. I checked the GlobSec Trends and YouGov opinion poll surveys conducted after the war, so you can For example, in May 2022, only around 40% of Slovaks and Hungarians recognized Russia as entirely or mostly responsible for the war against Ukraine. And more than 30% blamed the NATO of Slovaks, for instance. Regarding another poll published by Balcer, trends published regularly, this spring they published this poll, and in May, I think, around 35% of Hungarians and Slovaks, again, they declared that the West and Ukraine, they are responsible for the war. In the case of Slovaks, even more than 45% of people declared something like that. And the support for EU sanctions against Russia, in the case of Hungarians, was less than 45%, and half of Slovaks, only half of Slovaks, supported the EU sanctions against Russia in this opinion poll. Of course, we can find that the situation is even worse in Bulgaria, and there, again, you have this situation that you have far right, which is very much pro-Russian, and the left, traditional left, socialists. And of course, that's a challenge for us, because that's the matter of contradiction. You can be right now being, for example, a left politician, supporter of the EU integration and the EU as such, and at the same time being a pro-Russian politician. That's a very huge contradiction, in my opinion, and problem for the EU in the long term. You can see that also in certain countries that we believe that they are Western, for instance in Germany, that you have demonstrations in the east, of course, of the country, where you can find Die Linke, the left, demonstrating together with Alternative für Deutschland. And here again, there's a rise of support, especially for Alternative. And right now, in fact, their support, the popularity in the opinion polls is surpassing 15%, sometimes approaching even 17%. It's not still an enormous number, but the problem is that they are really concentrated, this support is concentrated in the eastern part of the country. And in some lands, it's like in Thuringen, for instance, together with Die Linke, so two anti-establishment parties which are pro-Russian in this land, they enjoy support of almost half the population. In Saxony, 40%, and it's on the rise, and that's a problem. And then Poland, last but not least, my country, and here, of course, you have enormous support for Ukraine, of course, with a small minority which is pro-Russian, but the great majority is pro-Ukraine. Some of my co-citizens, co-nationals, are pro-Ukrainian because they don't like very much Russian. It's not very genuine pro-Ukrainian approach. I'm different, of course. That's my coming out here, but it's nothing special in my case. And what we can see that the problem is that we have in power in my country law and justice, as you know, peace with Jarosław Kaczynski. And Poland is still a country which is recognized by the Freedom House as a free country. But what happened what has happened since 2015 in Poland is in fact this the democratic backslide, authoritarian slide, and we are in fact right now, I think we find ourselves on the verge of being relegated to the category of partly free countries. These negative trends are of course accompanied by the rise of corruption in Poland and dismantling of rule of law, which is a crucial issue. And here, unfortunately, what we can see, but that means that Poland, in my humble opinion, we are undermining the unity of the European Union, the basic fundamental European values. And here, that's a very tricky situation because the government is facing elections next year. And there is a probability that it can lose these elections. We can talk later about that, about this scenario, but nevertheless, what is crucial, that they decided that they in fact created this idea that we have two enemies. One, Russia, which is obviously simple, we can use HIMARS against them, and the second enemy is much more sophisticated, with a hidden agenda, Germany. And here, of course, what they created is this image that Germany dominated the EU, that the EU is just some kind of tool, instrument that Germany is using against Poland in order to subjugate Poland. And unfortunately, this idea resonates quite well among quite many Poles, and that's the problem. According to opinion polls, more than 45% of Poles really, they declared that they believe in this, sorry for my friend, this shit, that we have this total domination and that Germany wants to subdue Poland by using the EU as an instrument. And of course we have the fifth column in the country, opposition, which is supported by Germany, which wants to topple down Polish government. That's the message. Repeated. As you know, we don't have also fully fledged free media in the country, so that's the message repeated by pro-government, private and public media. And that's a challenge, and of course, here we can put some blame on Germany. Yanis mentioned, and I'm finishing right now, that we should, that's a window of opportunity for us to show, for the EU to show that we are serious players. That sounds terrific, great, really, but sometimes, in fact, from the perspective of Polish citizens, and especially Ukrainian citizens, I would like to see more deeds than words. Because look again at the numbers. There is this Institute for the World Economy based in Kiel in Germany. They of course work on open sources, and according to the data, for instance, regarding all military, financial, humanitarian commitments to Ukraine, you can compare Germany with the UK, the United Kingdom. Proportional to the size of economy is like 0.25% of GDP of the UK, and in the case of Germany, 0.17. So in fact, Germany should increase its support by 50% in absolute numbers. And then, if you compare the crucial military commitments for Ukraine, that's obvious that that's really matters right now, this military commitment. Again, here you have enormous gap, some kind of abyss between the UK and Germany. It's like 3-1, and that's again. Sorry for maybe I will shock you a little bit, but if you take France, Italy, Spain combined, it's like 1-8 in favor of the UK. So again, combined military commitments from Italy, France, and Spain are 8 times smaller in absolute numbers than commitments of the UK. And that's something that really matters for people like me in the region. And I will stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for this big picture. Just one very fast question, and you have 1 or 2 minutes to reply. But please, you haven't really talked about the Visegrad cooperation. Does it lose its relevance today as an institutionalized cooperation between the 4 countries, or does it develop into something what was called a V3+1 when Hungary is out actually from this cooperation intellectually and in economic and political terms? 1 minute, please.
1 minute.
Yeah.
So, very briefly, maybe it's not an accident that I didn't mention the V4 in political dimension as a regional organization. If you look at, for example, the last summit in Košice, that was really something surrealistic, that one of the topics was, in fact, as we probably are familiar with that, Orban's performance during the football game, let's put it that way, and the map of your country in the border before Trianon. Yeah. So, for instance, that's something. There is a very huge difference regarding political elites in the country, in the region, regarding Ukraine And if again I can provide you with numbers, especially not only regarding military commitments and generally financial support to Ukraine, but also, for example, refugees. For instance, we in Poland we host something like 1.5 million of Ukrainians. In the case of Czechia per capita, that's probably the highest number in the EU and in the world. It's like 460,000 people in Czechia. In your country, it's like slightly more than 30,000 refugees, because that's the sorry again for the shit that is sold by Orban. That in fact there is enormous inflow of Ukrainians. Most of them left your country, the great majority, and in the case of Poland and Czechia, they are staying. A lot of them moved to Germany, for instance. Germany hosts 1 million. So we have a very strong division on the crucial issue, the war in Ukraine and how we should react. Because if you look at the ruling political elite in Slovakia, its performance is very much pro-Ukrainian position. The opposition, especially Fico, that's another story, but the government is very pro-Ukrainian, in the same the case of Czechia and Poland. And here you have a very clear division if you compare these countries and Poland with Hungary.